You guys, welcome back to the Butterfly Season podcast. I am so excited for our next guest, Carrie Cohen. Literally amazing. She is a New York City based trained psychotherapist, and we are getting into the thick of nervous system retraining, subconscious patterns, reprogramming, RTT, EMDR. Like, we are getting into the, I don't even know, the matrix of brain work today. And this episode is so good. I cannot wait for you guys to listen. Carrie, I am so excited to have you on the Butterfly Season podcast. Everything that you are about is right up my alley in this season of life. I haven't shared this with you, but when I started Butterfly Season, the podcast, and when I was ideating it, I was definitely in like a cocoon season vibe, meaning I was learning and unlearning and really understanding the subconscious mind. I was reading Joe Dispenza books, doing meditations, and I got to a place where I felt like life was easier when I didn't know what was going on, right? When my subconscious wasn't loud, life felt so much easier. But now I've gone to a place where I'm okay, I can see my thoughts, I can see this pattern, and I can kind of rework it. So thank you so much for being on the show. I am so excited to dive deep into all of the things that I can barely put words to by having you on.
Thank you. I'm super excited to have this discussion with you. And to your point, it is something that I've spoken with my clients over the years on, which is we can't unknow something, right? So we can't unring the bell. And then it's the gift and the curse of knowing too much. And so there is a period where when all of the thoughts deeper inside the mind start to emerge to the surface, that we can feel really overwhelmed and not really know what to do with all them. But once we sort of get through that and get over the hump and start to get to the other side, it feels so much more manageable.
Yeah, totally. It totally does. So talk to me about what is exactly, in layman's terms, if we're breaking it down to in third grade reading level, what is subconscious programming?
Okay. So if we start with just the subconscious mind and we talk about, so what's going on in the subconscious mind. So there's three parts of the mind: the conscious, which is the front of the mind; the subconscious is the middle of the mind; and the unconscious is the back of the mind. We rarely work with the unconscious because those are just deeply repressed memories, but we could. But for the purposes of sort of what most people are doing today, we're really tapping into the subconscious mind, which is where all of our old experiences are housed, particularly the ones that we don't have easy access to, in our conscious mind. And somewhere between 80 and 90% of what we are doing in present day is being directed by what's inside of our subconscious mind. And so in there are all of our beliefs and the way we think about ourselves and others and the world. And for much of that, we don't usually know what's in there until we see how it manifests outwardly, right? So we see these patterns of relating, and we see these mental blocks, why the more money I make, I still have the same in my bank account, because the more I make, the more I spend. And so I still have the same amount. And so we stumble on them by looking at our outward action. And those are the ones then that most people, depending upon if they're in a relationship and they're trying to reframe where they're coming from, or for in a business, which is really what I focus on, is then we start to really trace back. We start with the outward facing behavior, and then we start to trace back. We trace back to the thoughts, the feelings, the beliefs, and then the programming, which is what's in the subconscious mind. And once we can start to connect the dots and understand where this behavior, this repetitive pattern is coming from, we can then start to create a new narrative around it. So of course we can't change the past, right? But we understand something about how we were previously and why we were that way. And then we create a new narrative around it. because it was something that we needed then and there, but likely don't need it here and now. So subconscious reprogramming then is really going into the source of where the patterns and blocks and limiting beliefs come from, and excavating them, if you will, and creating a new narrative around them so that the outward behavior, like the outward manifestation of those, looks different.
Yeah. And so I feel like all of that sounds easy. And I also feel like, and tell me if this is true, it's easy meaning like, oh yeah, here's the roadmap. Ask yourself, deeper questions when you're feeling triggered by something, or if you're noticing a pattern, boom, rewrite the story and you're better, right? But like, if only it was that easy. Mm-hmm. I feel like some people are probably in a position where they're like, I am asleep to my subconscious. I don't even know what's what. So like, how would someone be able to identify what is something that's worth exploring or that you should explore?
Okay, so I would say when people decide that they want to start on their own inner work, I always suggest that they start keeping a journal. And some people in the business world suggest that you keep like a work diary so you could see how you're spending all your time, and then you could start to categorize that time, and then you could streamline the process. So same goes for our inner world. So that's the outer business structure. And so now my focus is really on the internal structure. So you could keep a journal a week, even just a week, and you start to just track a lot of the, you track the themes that are coming up. Well, actually, you're tracking really the behaviors, the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, the triggers, all of that. Then you start to categorize it into themes, because we don't necessarily want to go down the rabbit hole of every single thing that comes up, right? Yeah. That would be so consuming. So we really want to look at the themes. And once we start to track the themes, it's like, wow, okay, so money came up 6 times this week, or my fear of hiring and bringing someone on board came up 3 times this week. Well, I wonder if that's actually related to money. And so then we start to categorize them. And then from there, we can begin to identify like, okay, this might be a block. And then making the decision to go in. But here's the thing about the subconscious mind is that I am not a believer that work can be done from a DIY standpoint until you've had a lot of your own experience doing it with someone, or your own training with someone. Because even I like have blind spots. And so I seek help from people to unleash some of what's like something in there.
Because our mind protects us, right? Our mind's like literally master manipulator at keeping you quote unquote safe, even though like doing the deep work, reprogramming, unlearning and relearning is really like, the what keeps you safe, I guess. I love that you say that in terms of like integration with somebody. During that like cocoon season time when I was doing Joe Dispenza meditations, I felt like I could only get so far. Like I still felt like things were missing and something just like wasn't quite sitting right with me. I didn't feel like, I don't know, whole, I guess. I was just in a place of life where I'm like, I know that I'm not happy with like why and how I got here, but I don't really know what was it about me that even got me to this point. You know what I mean? And so it's funny because something that came up for me, I was doing this like spiritual medicine, and I had an experience where like I felt like myself, my subconscious or me was telling myself like, you can hear the experiences of others and take them on as if they are your own because you're nervous that you have blinders to yourself. But those experiences are not your experiences. They're just corners. And I literally couldn't make sense of what that meant. Like a corner? Like, what do you mean a corner? And with my therapist, I was like, hey, this is what happened to me on my journey. And she was like, oh, like that makes so much sense. And I'm like, well, help me understand, ma'am, because I don't get it. And she was like, a corner, like there's not much that you can put in a corner. Like a corner is just there. If you put like a baby in a corner in timeout, everything that's in that corner is exactly what is so magnified because that's all you're looking at. But if you change your perspective and look at the other side of the room, you'll see that there's so much more on that other side. And so having somebody, to your point, to support with integration and like reprogramming some things was so helpful because I for sure couldn't have done that on my own.
Yeah, so you make such a good point though that there are certain things that can really break down the barriers, and hypnosis is one, plant medicine is another one. And so when we think about our mind is protecting us, so our defenses are actually invoked by our unconscious mind. So before we even get to the subconscious mind, the defenses have already been activated. So
Mm.
that is what makes it really tricky to be able to trust what's going on in our mind. It's not because we can't trust ourselves, but it's because of that very primitive, profound need for our psyche to really protect us from things that we're not yet ready to uncover or explore at that moment.
Yeah. And it's so crazy that you say that because I have a friend who's also doing a lot of deep trauma work and she's doing MDR. MDR, am I saying it right?
Yeah, EMDR.
EMDR, thank you. And I had tried it. I had a home invasion robbery when I was like 15 years old, and that was a very traumatic experience, but I felt like in my like several sessions of EMDR, I couldn't I couldn't get there. My mind literally wouldn't even get me past to get in the place to re-experience and kind of rewrite the thing. My friend, however, is doing it and she was saying like there's so many layered meanings that I'm getting to before I even get to the main trauma. So like there was 3 family members with her in this one incident, and the first thing that came up in EMDR was like being upset at how her brother was looking at her. And then the second thing that came up in the EMDR was like being upset with what her mom told her brother. And the third thing that came up, and it's all different, it's all the same situation, but the like most egregious act she hasn't even addressed in EMDR because it's like
Yeah.
layered, I guess. And is that I'm giving that example because is that the same thing as our subconscious trying to protect her from getting to that like maybe really painful portion of the story?
Yeah. So with EMDR, the intent is to really process the trauma. So I was trained in EMDR a really long time ago, like 25 years ago, when I worked in a trauma clinic.
Wow. You're like,
And
before it was trendy, I
yeah,
was trained
well,
in
and
EMDR.
I got to, before it was trendy, and I got to train with the founder because she was doing all her live trainings,
Nice.
which was very cool for
Yeah.
Shapiro. But recently, I last year got trained in rapid transformational therapy, which is also a very targeted focal piece of work. And so if we think about the EMDR, there's, you're sort of going one layer at a time. In rapid transformational therapy, you're going through all of the layers. So in RTT, you regress back to sort of 3 scenes, 4 maybe. The last one's usually the most powerful one because as the
Mm.
mind goes deeper and you're deeper into a deep state. So hypnosis is really a deep state of meditation. So as you get deeper and deeper, you get deeper into your subconscious. So it's highly probable that this example with your friend is we start at the top, we start at the surface, and we gradually make our way down because our psyche needs to be sure that we can actually handle what's going to come up. And
Wow.
it typically doesn't give us what we can't handle, which is why so many things are just naturally repressed in
Yeah.
our psyche, that we don't need to have the memory of some things.
Right. Can I tell you right now what I'm feeling in my body is a little bit scared because I feel like I can't unknow what you just told me right now about rapid transformational. But then I'm like, I don't even know if I want to go there. Like, I don't even know if I want to address, right? Like, for me, the home invasion still seeps into my entire life. Like, I'm still very scared at night, still very scared with windows. I'm still like trauma informed in terms of what's happening around me. But when you say that, I'm like, oh, shoot, like maybe I
Yeah.
can tap in there. When I was experiencing with plant medicine, I was really scared that something around that would come up that would make me so fearful again that it would be untangible, uncontrollable. I don't even know.
Yeah, I understand that, and I would just say to you that one of the things that because I started my career in trauma really, and one of the things about working your way through a trauma, and what I say to my clients in the moment is just remember you're reviewing it, you're not reliving it. And I was in a session
Yeah.
with someone last week, and they started to have a panic attack in the middle of the RTT session, and we just sort of like worked it through. But it's so visceral, all of this is stored in our body. And I get what you're saying, that when we're really scared of something, like we're consciously scared of it. Like it's like, oh, I don't, I don't really want to like take myself back there because I'm really scared what I'm going to learn about that, or if I'm going to start to feel it again in the moment. And that was like the worst feeling ever. And so that's a really common fear. And it's also a really workable sort of overcoming of a worry and fear.
Yeah. Thank you for that, by the way. So question for you on trauma-informed things. For someone listening, they may not have had an experience like mine, like home invasion, robbery. To me, that's like 10 out of 10 trauma, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's smaller things that we don't even realize.
Mm-hmm.
What are some instances that some people wouldn't classify as trauma, but it informs like the rest of their life, and they may not even realize that that is something that is informing their life? Like, what are some things that you see in that area, in those areas?
Right. Yeah. Small T trauma. So being picked last in gym class, being bullied as a kid. I had one example that came up when I was doing one of my own RTT sessions, where my 4th grade teacher, anytime anyone would ask a question, she would publicly shame them, and she was so admonishing. And so it really stuck with me and made it difficult for me to sort of figure out how to ask a question that wasn't a stupid question. And so, but I hadn't really made that connection because it was a fleeting memory in 4th grade. And then I'm in my 40s and I'm like, what is this thing about where I get these like palpitations when I'm ready to ask a question in a group of smart people? Like, that's so weird. So it really could be anything and everything. Like you are looking up to this teacher you have in 6th grade, and then you find out that they gave a bad report to your parent. And so it completely colored your own impression of how you thought people thought about you. And now you can't trust how they thought about you. That so many of those things get really embedded and crystallized in our mind without us even realizing it.
Yeah. I did before I tell the story, I have one that I think might be like a small T trauma for me. I used to really try hard at spelling when I was younger, and I wanted to be just the best at reading, the best at spelling, like when you're barely learning how to do it. And I remember my school having a spelling bee, and I was the first one out on like a trick word. And I don't know what happened then necessarily, but I do see a pattern where I'm like, I don't care about spelling. I'm really smart, and sometimes I misspell, but like, who cares? Like, that's what autocorrect is for. That's what whatever is for. Like, but I'm still really smart. I just can't spell that well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm positive it was from the spelling bee and being the first one out.
Well, and then we can think about how the mind develops these like compensatory responses. So we just compensate for that like limitation. And it's like, well, I don't care about that anyway. It was sort of like how I would be with like competition. Because in athletics, I was always chosen last. And it's like, I don't care. I'm not going to, I won't compete in the things that I know that I can't win. So I don't really care about that thing. So yes, our mind does sort of develop these compensatory responses around that for sure.
Yeah, totally. I definitely think that's a compensatory response for small T trauma back in like probably 3rd grade. Another one that came up for me recently, and this one has been such a powerful and profound learning. I did a childhood meditation with my therapist, and I was like, sometimes when you're in these meditations, you don't know where they're taking you. They're just guiding you, and your brain is just kind of like getting to the place. And I ended up in my childhood home, and I ended up in my mom's room meeting my little self while she was in timeout. And she was in timeout while my mom's boyfriend was home. Or at our house. And I remember feeling like my mom doesn't love me as much as her boyfriends, or whenever my mom has a boyfriend, she doesn't love me as much. In that instance, I realized that was the meaning that I assigned to that situation. Rewind to now. In therapy, we've been talking about like creating a family with my husband and like getting pregnant and all the things. And like, it's not that I'm resistant around having children. I'm just like, I literally would say why would we add a third party to the mix? Like, this is really good. And like, even just saying those things, it sounds like I'm talking about like a third sexual partner. You know what I mean? Like, why would we dabble in experimenting with other people when this is a really great thing? Like, been really like creating a baby is like having a baby out of love and like making something beautiful out of like your guys' beautiful relationship. And my therapist drew a correlation. And she said, when other third parties were in the mix when you were younger, you felt like that equated to you being loved less. And so therefore, now we're in this pattern, we're adding a quote unquote third party. You're equating that you'll be loved less in this relationship. And so that's why there's this resistance around it. And I was literally, Carrie, my mind was blown.
Yeah.
Because they feel so different.
Right. It's so interesting because the present day mind feels one thing, but that past experience gets trapped in there. And the reality though is, we could think realistically and then symbolically about triads. Triads are really hard, right? Like if you ever had, two girlfriends, if you were ever a group of three is hard. And so it does dilute the dyad. So I've done a lot of couples therapy and a lot of couples training. And so there is a lot like it's like we're two people and baby makes three. And so there is a whole layer of that is already inherent in it. And then you sort of add your mind's interpretation into it, right? You could see how little kids, they collapse the space between their thinking and an event as if it's the same thing. And that's how we make interpretations when we're kids. Go ahead.
What does that mean? Collapse the space. Like, could you give me an example? I'm sure I'm an example of this story, but I'm like, I don't really understand what you mean by collapse the space between like the event and I guess maybe what they make it mean.
Yeah. So it would be like, if I was in a sort of present day situation and I was having a conversation with a client or something, and they made some kind of statement about something, and then I thought it was about me, and rather than keeping the space there to think about it, like it happens a lot with projections. So the client is saying something, and I'm thinking, are they talking about me? Is this me? Is this about me? If I leave the space available, the metaphorical space open for me to be able to think about that, then I can have my mind to understand it. But if I'm 5, or if I'm an adult and I don't have the capacity yet to do that, I'm going to collapse the space, and what that person says or does and my interpretation of it are going to be the exact same thing. And so there's no like observing mind available in that moment, which again, as kids, we don't really have that, which is why parents, they're, becoming more mindful of that today because it's all over, but being able to talk through those kinds of things when kids like observe things.
So, and if I'm not a parent currently, but let's just say a parent's listening, what are some proactive things that you can do to help? Because I feel like when I'm hearing you, I'm like, well, I have no idea when my child is going to make some sort of negative interpretation to a series of events. As a parent, how could you be proactive around something like that?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics as a mom. My daughter's 13. Is that really, look, so no parent is perfect. So every kid, when they grow up, they're going to have grievances about their parent because, we all make mistakes, right? So I always find that, this notion of parenting from the inside out, where we become really mindful and aware of what our own triggers are, because our kids will bring out triggers we didn't even know we had. It's a whole new level. And so to be able to be mindful of our triggers and what gets stirred up in us, and then be able to use that as knowledge to then have conversations with our kids. Like an example might be, so, I study a lot with nervous system regulation, right? So I use it I could use it everywhere. And so I'm talking with my husband about it, my daughter about it. So there would be times though, where my daughter would start like screaming and yelling at me, and I'd yell back at her, and she'd be like, Mom, you're making it worse. And she is actually, from a nervous system regulation standpoint, she's absolutely right. if she's becoming more dysregulated and I'm responding in a dysregulated way, we're both becoming dysregulated and I'm making it worse because I'm the one who needs to be able to take a step back and have an observing mind around it. So I think for parent, and so, it's like, okay, so I made that error and then I corrected it. And so I went back and I was not in the moment. I had to really calm myself down, but later I said, you're right. When you're rising, I need to be really calm because that's what you need from me in order to get yourself back down to a grounded level. And so I've just ingrained it in myself that when she's rising, that I get really quiet. My voice moves much more slowly. And then that actually calms me down because I'm human. So I'm going to start rising. So
Right.
parenting is, as parents, we get a lot of grace and a lot of leeway. We don't give ourselves a lot of grace and a lot of leeway, but the reality is that there's a lot of latitude there to make mistakes and correct them. Lots.
Yeah. Is it possible that like an irregulated or dysregulated response could also be to be calm? Like because I feel like there were times where like me and my mom would get into it. It was just the two of us. So like the vibe was very much sisterly. Like even now as an adult, but even growing up, my mom would call me her sister's name by accident all of the time. And I felt like sometimes when she was calm, that would make me more riled up. Like if she was responding to me calm, I'm like, ah, but maybe that was also to calm me down. But I just felt like you're making me even more mad right now.
Well, that is so interesting to think about from the standpoint of when there's a mismatch in emotions. So we could see that with husbands and wives too. When we're bringing something to our partner and they're just like sitting there like, oh yeah, it's like, I mean, doesn't that like grind your gears? And they're like, I mean, I don't know. And then it's sort of, so yes, when there is what feels like a lack of attunement, I'm not attributing that to your mother because obviously I have no idea where she was coming from with that.
Right.
At face value, it looks like she's just giving you a calm, regulated response. But when we're on the receiving end of what feels like a misattunement, where somebody's not matching our emotional affect or what we're presenting, that mismatch can be really triggering and provoking. So and it could feel like I'm not getting attended to in the way I need to right now.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I feel like my husband and I had that today and yesterday. I was like I went down this whole rabbit hole of something like of nothing. And I'm like, look, I found it on ChatGPT. It explained. And I'm like waiting for him to be like, so cool, read it to me. And he was just like, oh, great. And I'm like, you don't, you don't want me to read this to you? He's like, I mean, you can. Or like earlier today, like there was a little celebratory moment that it was like in preparation for a bigger celebratory moment for us. And I was just like, I felt like, oh, this is small. Like it's not that it's not worth celebrating, but I just was a mismatch in energy. And he was like, you're not excited? I was like, it's not that I'm not excited. I just, so I can see how maybe in more toxic environments or even just generally, if something maybe means more to the other person, how that can be a triggering mismatch. So what do you say for a parent or someone in a relationship where maybe you feel like there's one receiving party that feels like it's a mismatch and it's triggering, but maybe you're trying to de-escalate it or really just de-escalate? How do you navigate something like that if it's triggering for either your child or your partner?
Yeah, so I think the main point of that is to convey to the other person that you see them, right? Like I see you, and I put "see" in quotes because really that's what we all want, is to be seen. And when we're seen, we can be known. And so the mismatch in affect and in emotion oftentimes makes us feel not seen. So if we can convey that we see the other person without getting into the hysterics of all of the emotion by matching their emotion, because that's oftentimes not helpful in some of these dysregulated states, but to really say like, to respond in a calm way, but not in like a, oh, I see you. But it's like, oh my gosh, yes, I feel that. I get it. I could see absolutely that was really frustrating and annoying to you. So there's sort of like there's like an activation in the voice.
Yeah.
So it's not an exact match, but it's not like the normal calm, grounded, because that can be really annoying. I mean, I do that for myself if I'm like in an activated state with someone because it grounds me.
Right.
But yes, I do think having some level of activation that conveys to the other person, like, yeah, I feel that like energy. Because we think about emotion, it's an energetic charge, right?
Right. And so I'm curious how I want to segue a little bit to leadership and subconscious and all of the things. How does some of what we touched on, I know that it's everywhere. I know that like if you're experiencing one thing at home, you're probably experiencing it at work or you're probably experiencing it with your friends. For whatever reason, it's really hard for me to connect those dots. When I realized that I struggled with codependency, I seen it so much in the workplace and I couldn't unsee it anymore and I was trying to fix it. But then after I was like, oh my God, it's in my marriage. Oh my God, it's in my friendships. Oh my God, it's with my parents, right? Like it's in so many ways. So as it relates to leadership, how could somebody address some of these issues or what does it look like in the workplace basically?
Yeah. So I would say for people, so if we think about leadership and we think about leadership style and entrepreneurship, and we think about some of the attributes that are inherent in most leaders and entrepreneurs, and we think about the ones that make people successful, that like taking time to really know yourself and know what provokes you and triggers you. This way, when you are in a situation that you know is going to be provoking or triggering, you can be more proactive in being able to deal with that. You know, people say detaching from the outcome a lot. And I have a client that I've been working with for quite a long time. It's a male and he's a CEO of several companies. And he has really had to master the art of detaching from the outcome because there's been lots of just sort of big deals. Some work out really great and some don't work out well at all. And so I think for leaders, it is especially important if you want to lead your team and your business in a way that sort of I always call it keeping the pipes clean, right? You know, it's like the pipes under your house, you don't really know what's in there until it starts like bubbling up in your toilet. And so at that point for an entrepreneur or a leader, it's a little late sometimes because now it's cascading out into your business and your team. And so really keeping track of that by recognizing the patterns and taking feedback from people, right? I've always said to my mentors, like, are you seeing something that I'm not seeing right now about myself? Because we all have blind spots and I want to be told if I'm missing something. And it takes some inner strength and resilience, I think, for us to get there, to be open to being told, like, I think you might be like a little sort of off track on this one here with yourself.
Yeah. I feel like not being attached to the outcome is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I say that because I'm like, the outcome is what we all work for, right? It's like, if you're not attached to the outcome, then what are you attached to kind of keep your motivation going?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, I think about it like, so when I was building my private therapy practice 20 years ago, of course, I was attached to the outcome because I really wanted to have a successful practice. But gradually over time, as I matured as a woman and as a business owner, I could detach myself from all the mini outcomes. I could detach myself from, am I going to get this client or not this client? Am I going to get a call today? If I do a consult with this person, am I going to get them? So in that way, I could detach from the mini outcomes. Now, detaching from the overall outcome means we have to sort of go into something surrendering to whatever happens. And I would say the biggest place that this shows up for people would be if you're a parent. Okay. So as a mom, I want all sorts of things for my daughter, but she's 13 now. So we have 4.5 more years with her till she's done with high school.
Right.
And I've been working very actively on detaching from and surrendering from the outcomes that I want her to have. because ultimately what I really want for her is to just be happy and have a happy, healthy life. So I have to work really hard to detach from that outcome. And I would say that is a lifelong process it's a lifelong developmental task, whether it's with business or it's with your children, what have you. It is probably one of the hardest things I would say to master.
Right. And maybe what I would love to know, and for somebody who's like maybe motivated by the outcome, what is the outcome when you detach yourself from the outcome?
Yeah. So what is the outcome? So I think about the overall outcome. So if I use the example of my private practice, I wanted it to be successful, and it was. So if I'm detaching from that outcome, not permanently, but I'm detaching from the outcome. So I built my practice, it was brick and mortar. So we weren't using social media. So I would do a lot of in-person events, and I had to detach from the outcome of those in-person events, because in-person events and podcast interviews, all these things, they don't produce results right away. I mean, 6 months, 12 months, 3 years later, you hear from someone. So in that way, you detach from the outcome of that thing. You don't detach from the outcome of sort of the overall vision of where you're going. I do think that that is different. And I think when people say detach from the outcome, it is misinterpreted in many ways. So people say, just don't be emotional, or I don't care what happens. It's not an apathy or a lack of caring. It's taking the intense charge out of every single in the moment action that is there to drive you towards your big vision.
I love how you've explained that, because then that makes me think like the yo-yo of entrepreneurship, right? Someone once told me, like, don't get too high on the highs and don't get too low on the lows, because it's just like dysregulated, if you will. Especially if, there's the one thing that you thought and it doesn't go that way. Now you're really, really low, but then two weeks or 2 years later, you're like, God bless that thing didn't happen for me. You know what I mean? It's like, there's this, I don't even know if it's a parable or some story, but it's like, good or bad, who's to say? You don't know yet.
Right.
You don't know yet.
So if you make every example mean something, then you're along for the ride on the roller coaster. And so in that example, what we want to do is we want to stand next to the roller coaster and watch it move, rather than being on it and being swept up by it. It's sort of like, I always use the analogy of surfing. It's like riding the wave without getting swallowed up by it. And so I do think that that's really a challenge for people, because we get so invested and excited about things. And, some things work out and some don't.
Yeah.
But that doesn't say anything about the overall vision or trajectory, actually, which is also why it's really good to detach from the outcome, because those little examples, it's like, okay, so if my daughter has she doesn't like Spanish. Okay, so, oh my gosh, I'm going to get all upset about that. But the reality, what does that really mean in like the bigger picture? Probably nothing.
Right. Right. I guess that's a great question to ask yourself. What does that mean in the big picture? Because most things are just like, especially at that age of high school, I feel like. So I would love to know, what are some areas that you would say maybe are familial or feel like more strongly familial, but kind of embed themselves in the workplace in terms of like subconscious reprogramming? Just because I think, and I ask this because I think so many things seep into one into the other. We think like money or attachment styles or, anything. Is there one that you see that in your practice that is most common, but people kind of overlook?
And when you say familial, you're talking about family, right? You're not saying
Yes.
familiar. Yeah. So, gosh, I would say, okay, so one of my sort of 3 core blind spots for people when they're growing is patterns of relating. And so that's what you're asking about right now, because I bring the way I relate to every relationship, right? whether it's all my past romantic relationships, my current one, people I work with, like I bring myself. So all of the relatedness and the dynamics that are going on. Now, sure, when I'm relating with someone else, they bring their ingredients and then we create a different recipe. So I would say, I can't really say that there's one. I would say that if we sort of think birth order, okay, so the youngest kid tends to be more scrappy. The middle kid tends to they sort of fall in the background and, they sort of blend in. The older one tends to be a kind of more grounded, stable leader. So you might see that. I'm the youngest. I'm kind of scrappy. I've had to like soften that edge over the years. Because it doesn't really bode well when you're working with other people. It's edgy. It's really edgy. And so I would say that all of our our relatedness patterns manifest in all areas of our life. And then we are the common denominator. So when I am working with people who are having a problem with a client or with a colleague or a team member, it's like, well, where else have you seen this? And at first sight, they'll say, oh, nowhere, because that's the conscious response. But once when they start digging, they're like, oh, that's really funny. Like, I felt this with my first boss at my first job, or, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Actually, my older brother used to do this to me. And so we could start to really trace the pattern back. And patterns of relating, there's plenty that are fine, but we usually in most of our areas of life, we have like 2 or 3 that we're like, okay, those are probably need to change.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I feel like over the years, I can trace it back to high school, but for sure my early years of college and in law school and post-grad and business, I keep meeting the same person, but I don't know that it's the same person until we fall out. And I'm like, this is it's the same pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
And even now in relationships, I'm just like, I don't even know how to issue spot this. I still don't know how to issue spot this. I can just spot it retroactively because it's sparking some of the same feelings and the pattern seems to be the same. Obviously, I'm the common denominator, but I just don't know how to issue spot that. So what would you say to somebody who's like, okay, I notice a pattern, but I notice a pattern on the after effect, I guess, and not really like the lead up to that.
Which is usually what happens. So if I take that's a super common example for people when they're either hiring a team member and they're like, why does this keep happening to me? I keep having the same problem. Or with somebody in their romantic life. Why do I keep choosing the same kind of partner who ends up doing the same thing to me? That we would say it's probably there's something like much deeper that is being activated or provoked that really and it's so typical that we would operate we would find it after the fact. After that thing sort of materializes, and this is after you fall out, after that thing materializes, because no one would ever consciously go in choosing to have that kind of experience, right?
Right.
In the therapy world, we think about in the world of psychology, we do think about the unconscious connection with others. And so in sort of the coaching world, we would think about the energy or how the energies are matching up. But there is an unconscious communication going on. So I would be thinking about that's really interesting. What is the yin and yang that you and this person end up creating? Because you fulfill some kind of need for that person to be able to carry out this thing, whatever this thing is. And you are repeating something as a way to try to uncover something, unconsciously repeating it, right? As a way to try to uncover something and work something out. And so yes, you're going to only look, if this were your husband, you would look at it from the dynamic of the couple. If this were a teammate, you'd look at it from that standpoint, because it would be really about wow, what are we sort of co-fulfilling here? We are co-creating a dynamic here. So you can't really do that with the other person because they're gone. But you could think about in retrospect, like, wow, what have I co-created with these people? Like, what are their factors that their concepts they brought to the table that I was sort of drawn to at first sight, and it ends up like taking me down that same path. See, I find that kind of thing like, very intriguing to really try to like, it's detective work.
Right. And what I've noticed, at least like in the therapy work that I've been doing over the past several months, like it's never really the first question or the answer to the first question, right? It's like 3-4 questions deep where you finally get to like the root and you're just like, wow, I would have never put those things together. But it is something that haven't necessarily explored in therapy, but something that I've been conscious of like in my life. I'm like, I've met this person several times. I keep meeting them and I keep having the same experiences with them. And I'm just like, what is going on, with my subconscious and my programming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something about that same kind of person has you drawn in at first sight.
Yeah, totally. I just want to express some gratitude towards you. I think, no shade to any of my guests that are listening right now. This is probably one of my favorite episodes, truly. Just because I really think that we underestimate the power of some of the self-work, the power of the brain, and how you can kind of re-regulate dysfunction, unlearn, relearn, and write something new and change some of those patterns that have been ingrained in you for so long that are seemingly nothing, but end up becoming something big and dictating your life. And I have an appreciation for that. And I love how you're able to break down these much larger concepts into things that are understandable. Like as you were talking, I'm like, I don't know what that means. And then you're like, this is what it means, So thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. I want to know, where can people find you? What are you up to right now? What are you excited about? How can people get plugged into this wealth of knowledge that we barely uncovered for like 45 minutes?
So first off, I want to thank you for having me and giving me the space to have this conversation with you, because this stuff lights me up. I love talking about it. So thank you for that. And I'm active on Instagram and LinkedIn. LinkedIn's my main profile, but I'm also active on Instagram. And I currently am going to be rolling out my signature group program, which is called Success Rewired. I'm currently putting out my a 2-part workshop, which is called Regulate and Rewire Your Nervous System for Success. And so my programs are all based on my 3-part framework, which is the neuro leadership approach, which is subconscious reprogramming, of course, mind-body regulation, and success leadership mindset. And really what I help entrepreneurs do is remove all of the barriers, the upper limits, by subconscious reprogramming and nervous system retraining, in order to just keep the pipes clean, to first do a good clean out of all the limiting beliefs and mental blocks, and then keep the pipes clean so that we could just keep growing. And I do believe life and business are intertwined. So when you're growing in one, you're growing in the other. I don't really separate them when I'm working with clients. It's whatever comes up, comes up. And so we can truly be untethered to those old patterns and those old blocks. And that's really what I help my clients do.
I love that. And you guys, I am a big believer in like there's a direct correlation to your self-work and success. And a lot of the people that I look up to that are doing really great, they invest in their self-work. And so if you're listening now and you're feeling called to any of this, I will have it all linked in the show notes for you. Carrie, thank you so much. You are amazing and just a pure light. Thank you for being on the Butterfly Season podcast. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll see you guys soon.